Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm hoping that you can all still see and hear me. Welcome to this session for high schools in Climate Action Week. So I'm just going to share my screen to start the presentation that we'll be going through today. So hopefully you can all see my presentation nice and clearly. And we'll get started. So welcome to Climate Action Week on behalf of Keep Scotland Beautiful as part of our Climate Action Schools programme. So what is happening this week? What's going on? So we've got Scotland's Climate Week. So this is a global event and Scotland's chosen to take part in this week. And we've got lots of activities encouraging climate action across the country. Also this week is the Great Big Green Week, which is a celebration across the UK of action on climate change. So that started last Saturday, so the 24th of September, and it carries on until this Sunday, the 2nd of October. And there's going to be more than 1,000 different events taking place, so do have a look and see what's going on in your area. So a year ago, we had COP26, which was a landmark conference, and it was held here in Scotland in Glasgow. And this year, COP is travelling all the way to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And as part of the transition from COP26 to COP27, there is an event called Running Out of Time, which is a relay that's being run all the way from Glasgow to Egypt. And as part of that, getting started with Running Out of Time, so that starts on Friday. And we're going to have an assembly on Friday as part of Climate Action Week. So it's an assembly of all the schools from our early years, primary schools, up to you guys, the high schools, joining us in an assembly to celebrate all of the amazing work you've been doing this week and also to watch the relay getting started. So we'll have our roving reporter, Kat, out in Glasgow Green watching the start of the relay. So if you can, please do tune into that. So it's 9:30, the assembly starts on Friday. So do come along to that if you can. We will also hopefully have our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, in a school in Glasgow, watching all of the amazing things that people have been doing this week as well and sharing her thoughts. So please do join us if you can for the assembly on Friday. So as part of Climate Action Week, there's a few things that we'd quite like to get you to do to take some climate action. So there's 3 things that we'd like to encourage you to do. The first is to go out litter picking, because we can't afford to let all the litter that's lying around damaging our wildlife and harming the environment. So if you can, we'd love it if you could go out and do a litter pick, and please do share your pictures of your litter pick as well with us on social media. We're at KSB Scotland. We would also like you to take part in our craftivism competition. So craftivism is basically a gentle form of activism. So it's a combination of craft and activism. So the idea is that you create something with art and you use it as part of your activism. So what we're asking you to do is if you can create a collage, something like this. So this is from an amazing artist called Paul Bartlett. And Paul makes these amazing collages using ripped up pieces from wildlife magazines, particularly, so you can see there's text in the background. And there's a video on our website and in the resources that your teachers should have shared with you on how to actually go about making one of these collages. And if you make these collages, please do take a photo of them and scan them and send them in to us. Because we have a competition. So we've got separate age groups. So there's a specific high schools competition. And if you win the high schools competition, your school will get a free virtual tour of either the Edinburgh Zoo or the Highland Wildlife Park. You can pick which one. And your school will also receive a camera trap. So that's a little camera that you can put out in your school grounds, and it monitors movement, and when it sees movement it records a little short bit of video, so you can record some of the animals and the wildlife that visit your school grounds or surrounding area if you've got permission to put the camera out further. So it's really worth entering. So get involved in some craftism. What we really want you to do is create a picture with a native animal, so for example our puffins, that are being affected by climate change, and include in your image a message of climate action. So that's the second thing. The third thing is we'd like you to pledge to become a climate action school and take action through our education programs and campaigns. So you can just go onto our website, go onto our education pages, you'll find them under Climate Action Schools. So this is a banner for all of the amazing educational things that we have going on. You can see them all listed on the bottom there. So please go onto the website and pledge to become a climate action school and take part in whatever way you can. That's going to be one of the messages that we have today, is to think about what you can do yourself. You don't have to do everything. What can you do though? So go and make that pledge. That would be amazing. So that's the three things that we'd like you to do this week. Go on a litter pick, get involved in craftivism, sorry, and make a pledge to be a climate action school. So the rest of what I want to talk to you about today is climate action equals climate justice. So that's the topic of most of our session today. So to start with, I'd like you to have a think about, how does climate justice make you feel? Now, you don't need to share this with anybody. I just want you to keep that in your head. When you hear the term climate justice, how does it make you feel? And I've got some little emoticons there, 1 to 8. If you want to share it with your teachers, you can, and they can share it in the chat, but don't feel you have to. I just want you to think about, when you hear that term, how does it make you feel? Sad, confused, angry, happy? Have a think about which one. Okay. So we're going to revisit this at the end, and hopefully you'll maybe feel a little bit differently depending on how you feel now. So today, what are we going to cover? We're going to start with talking a little bit about the human footprint, what that is and what it includes, the meaning of climate justice, and then we're going to relate climate justice and the human footprint with a little bit of history to how we got to this point. So how did we get to the point of the issues that we have today? And one of the biggest things is we're going to think about what we can do to change things, to make things better. So to start with, let's have a think about the impact that we have on the world around us. We're going to think about our human footprint. So we're going to start with a footprint of a not human. So this is a footprint of a deer. And you might have seen quite a few deer footprints depending on where you live. You might not have done, but we have a lot of deer in Scotland. And as the deer live, they leave an imprint and they have an impact on the world around them. So that impact can be in the form of the food that they eat. So when they eat bark from trees and leaves and grass, they're changing the environment around them. When they excrete urine and feces, that will have an influence on the environment around them. Just in their movements, so actually creating these footprints, they impact the ground, they change the soil and things and the world around them. And with the sounds that they make and the way they move through the world, again, there's an impact there of for everything that they do. And other animals and plants rely on them, and other animals and plants are harmed by them. But what can happen is if we end up with too many deer, so we get an overpopulation, and this applies to any population of any animal or plant, then it starts to have a much bigger impact on the world around them. And in the case of the deer, what can happen is, particularly in wooded areas, so deer really like living in woods, they love forest environments, they like the shelter and the cover that they get, but they eat tree bark and they eat young trees, particularly young saplings. And that can mean that actually they end up, if we get too many deer, we get damage to the woodlands and we get less trees growing and we get less forested areas. And that can be a problem for the deer because they then don't actually have their ideal environment. They're having to live out in the open, which they don't like. So with that growing population, that big population, they can have a negative impact on the environment around them. So let's have a think and relate that to our human footprint. So as humans, we all have a footprint, we all have an impact on the world around us. So what do you think makes up the human footprint? What kind of influences do we have and impacts on the world around us? And you can just think these in your head, or it'd be really great if you can share some of these in the chat and we can see what you think. So what do you think? And think about, don't just think about some of the negative influences that our human footprint has. What about some of the positives as well? So like I say, if you want to just have a think in your head, that's fine, but it'd be great if you could share some ideas in the chat. Might be, if you prefer to think the things in your head, then that's absolutely fine. So I'll go through some of the things that I think make up our human footprint. So we talked about the deer and what it eats. We've got farming and food and our food production. So growing and producing food to feed ourselves leaves an impact on the world around us. Oh, and someone said they're overfishing. Brilliant. So exactly, in terms of producing the food that we need, we can take too much from the environment. We have to change, for farming, we need to change the way the land is used in order to grow our crops and feed livestock. In terms of fishing, we can overuse some of the resources that we have in order to feed ourselves. So that's an impact that we have. We have to create a lot of energy to power our homes, our transport, to make all the stuff that we use. Everything that you use in your life requires energy to make it. And making that energy leaves a footprint as well, particularly if we're burning fossil fuels, so coal, oil and gas to create that energy. We're releasing a lot of greenhouse gases, which is what is causing the warm up in our climate. So we've got all the energy that we're producing, so that's an impact. We've also got a lot of waste. So we said all this stuff that we're trying to produce, that gets wasted. So we've got the bodily excretions that come from our bodies and they impact the world around us. We've also got the waste from all of our stuff. And that will have an impact on the environment. But like I say, it's not all bad news. It's not all bad things that we do to the environment and with our lives. Humans also create amazing art, literature, music, dance, theatre. We're incredibly creative species and we create an incredibly beautiful, valuable things. We also are an incredibly inquisitive species. We're explorers, we're scientists. We learn about the world around us and we contribute new knowledge which can help to solve problems and help to make life better for us and the environment. And we're also incredibly good at community, charity and kindness. Now, I know sometimes it might not feel like that. Often it feels like quite the opposite, that the world is a horrible place with people not being nice to each other and not cooperating with each other. But actually, we are the most cooperative species on the planet in terms of cooperating with individuals that we don't know. So we will cooperate with people who are not family and who are not friends. We will cooperate with strangers. That is pretty much unique in the animal kingdom. And we have this incredible capacity to cooperate and help each other. And that's something to really be celebrated. So whereas we do have all these negative impacts, we're also quite an impressive species. So thinking about these things, what could we think of as the difference between us and the deer? So what I would say is there's a lot of differences in terms of what impacts that we have. But one of the crucial differences between us and the deer is that we have the ability to change the size and shape of our footprints. So the deer doesn't, it works out of instinct. It sees a tree, it's hungry, it eats the bit of bark on the tree. It doesn't think, oh, well, if I eat this, it might kill the tree. I better not do that. It just lives out of instinct. Whereas we have the capacity to identify that maybe doing something might cause harm or it might cause good and change what we do because of that. And that's a real amazing power to have, to be able to shape the size and shape of those footprints. So thinking about that, we've got this power to change the size and shape of our footprints and influence the world around us. So that brings us kind of back towards climate justice. So there's so many of us now, we've got this big population of humans. So what do we think climate justice means? Again, if you can share that in the chat, that would be brilliant. But otherwise, you can just have a think in your own head about what do you think climate justice means? Or what does it look like? if you're not sure of a kind of definition, what would climate justice look like? Just going to give you a minute to have a wee think. Okay, so hopefully in your head now you've got some kind of idea of what you think. I can see someone is typing, so I'm just going to wait a second, but keep thinking, what do you think it means or climate justice would look like? What does that look like to you in your head? So making changes to the world. Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing. People being held accountable for their actions that harm the planet. Really good. So yeah, accountability is one of those key parts of climate justice. So it's being held accountable. So being responsible for something and for your actions and how they affect the planet, and being and also being accountable for other people's actions as well. So really good. Thank you very much for sharing. So there's lots of different ways of defining climate justice. And one of the ways that we could think about it is in terms of something called the global goals. So hopefully you've heard of this, the global goals, so the Sustainable Development Goals that were created by the United Nations as a way to map a future for humanity where that is sustainable. But part of that sustainability basically also means that everybody has the space to live their lives without trampling on anybody else. And so just as you said, so it's making changes to the world, it's being held accountable, it's giving back to what you've destroyed, which is a really good one. Thank you for sharing that one. So it's evening things out and making a sustainable future where everybody has a chance to have their footprint without trampling on anybody else. So one way of looking at climate justice is to think about building a better world based on these goals, based on the concept of sustainability and also equality. So how do we think? So mentioning equality there, we've talked about accountability and going back and righting wrongs, but what about equality? How do you think inequality is linked to climate change? Again, I'll give you a minute to have a think. Share in the chat if you want to, or just have a think in your own head. How do we think inequalities between people would be linked to climate change? So that's interesting. So we've got a couple of answers coming in. So not all the countries should be held accountable in the same way. That's really interesting. Thank you. And poorer countries tend to suffer more from the impacts of climate change. Excellent. Yet less developed countries have to use fossil fuels to develop themselves. Really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Really interesting answers. So absolutely. So and often we think this on a country basis. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of just how equality is particularly linked to climate change and also other environmental damage, and how that is absolutely between countries, but it can also be within countries as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing those. So these are just a few examples. There's a few images and I'll talk you through them. So at the top, you can see an image of a lake, and on the left, it looks quite big, and on the right, it looks quite small. So this is the Aral Sea. You may have heard of the Aral Sea, you may not. It sits on the border of Kazakhstan. And the Aral Sea was once the 4th largest lake in the world. So it was 420 times the volume of Loch Lomond. So it was a huge inland sea. And it was brilliant for the local economy. It had good fish stocks. and the local environment worked really well. But what happened was water was diverted from the rivers that fed into the sea in order to feed land to grow cotton and rice. And actually, the areas they were trying to grow cotton and rice were pretty unsuitable for growing those things, which is why they had to divert so much water away from channeling into this sea. And what happened was, over time, there was too much water removed and the lake started to dry up. So the picture on the left is actually when it was partway to drying up. So it was actually a lot larger than that to start with. And then the picture on the right is at its lowest extent. So it got to about 10% of its original size. And that destroyed the fish stocks, created a lot of salt that got picked up in dust storms and blown into the air. And this mostly severely affected local people. So people living near the area, they lost their fishing and their livelihoods, and they were damaged by the air pollution created by all these salty dust storms. But they didn't actually benefit, though, from the money that was generated from the cotton and from the rice growing. That was funneled off elsewhere. So it's just as you've mentioned, so often people who are local to these things are suffering the environmental damage, but they're not benefiting from the extraction of the resources. And that's true with a lot of resource extraction for lots of different things around the world. We also have an issue, so we mentioned earlier all this stuff that we have, and you'll be very well aware of the problems that we have with too much plastic at the moment. And often countries are overproducing waste in the form of things like plastic that could be recycled, but they haven't developed enough infrastructure to recycle those things. So they send them to another country and tell them to recycle it, but they don't have the infrastructure, so the plants and things that are needed either. And so it just gets dumped. And so this was the case for the UK in particular, was found to be guilty of shipping recyclable materials to countries like Turkey, where they were counting it as being recycled, but Turkey wasn't able to handle the volume of waste, and so it was just being dumped in people's back gardens. Well, sorry, back gardens, but backyards and areas. So again, inequality in who's dealing with the rubbish that's generated. And then finally, like I said, often we do think of this being, kind of more of a global problem. It's a problem that happens between countries. It's a problem that happens with countries that we think of as poorer. But actually, the issue is also happening within countries. So within the UK, if we're looking at that bottom right picture, we're thinking about air pollution, particularly generated by traffic, and also by things like incinerators, which is basically a big factory, a big plant where they burn waste, creates lots of air pollution. And often people from poorer communities, poorer economic backgrounds, and also from ethnic minorities are much more at risk from the effects of air pollution. And that's due to basically where they live. They often have a lack of access to green spaces like parks, and they have less political power. So what that means is, for example, if there's a new incinerator to be built, so it's going to burn waste, it's going to chuck all this horrible stuff into the atmosphere. If you're living in a poorer community, often you have less political power to oppose that incinerator. Whereas if you're living in a wealthy, well-off community, you've got more political power. Politicians listen to you, and you're able to actually get rid of that incinerator, and it gets moved and then ends up somewhere where people are poorer. So often we have this inequality in the exposure of people to the effects of climate change due to nothing to do with their, not to do with their fault. It's an inequality. The people who are producing the most of this, the greenhouse gases, are often not the ones who are dealing with the problems it's caused by. So this seems pretty bleak and not very nice. But how did we get here? How did we get to this point where we have all of this waste and we've got all these inequalities and we're not recycling things as much as we should, and and money is being funneled away from people who are actually living at the site where resources are coming from? So it started with what we call a linear system. So that just basically means a system that works in a line rather than in a circle. So this image comes from an amazing project called The Story of Stuff. And we're going to watch a little bit of the video from the Story of Stuff project in a little bit, just to illustrate some of the points. But this is image from it, and it's just a really nice illustration of the system that we had and how things work up until recently. So on the left, you can see we've got our planet and we're extracting lots of resources. So we're damaging the natural environment by taking lots of resources out of the environment. It's then going to factories, which are putting out lots of pollutants to create stuff that goes into a supermarket or any other kind of shop. and then it's sold. And that third arrow along, so between the shop and what looks like a house, that's the really important one, because that's where we end up with the consuming, so the shopping. And that is where all the money's made. So the big fat corporation there with its big dollar sign on, and the wee government beside it, they're all making lots of money out of that shopping bit. And then the shopping gets taken to people's houses, and we get lots and lots of stuff. And then that's too much stuff, so we get rid of it and it goes in the waste. And then it's either burned, like in this case with an incinerator, or dumped. So that's a linear system, it goes in a line. And what kind of keeps this line working is what's called consumerism, which is basically the concept of buying, so buying stuff. And the move to consumerism was very much a deliberate choice. So we decided to move to consumerism after World War II. And that was a way of making money in the world. That was how the world was then supposed to work. But it was a deliberate choice. It didn't have to go that way. It wasn't always going to go that way. It was deliberate. And the way that this model works is it demands consumption. So you have to buy things and keep buying in order for the whole model to work. So at a faster and faster and faster rate. So actually, if you look at it, only 1% of the stuff we buy is still in use 6 months later. So that's a very small amount of what we buy is still in use. So we have to keep consuming more and more stuff. And it also means that people are only valued as consumers in this system. So your value comes from how much stuff you buy, not from anything else that you contribute. If it doesn't make money and doesn't contribute to this third arrow along, you're not valued. So let's have a look at some of the ways that we kind of keep into this kind of way of doing things, this consumerism. So we're going to look a little bit of the Story of Stuff video. So I'm just going to make sure that I've got the settings right so that you will be able to hear the video. Just 2 seconds. Just making sure that you can actually hear this. Hopefully everybody can hear that.
No, can't hear that at the moment. But if you, when you share your screen, if there should be a toggle button at the top that says share with sound. So try unsharing and then reshare. That should do it.
I'll unshare it. Thank you very much, Kat. I'll unshare and reshare it. Can't find that button, so I'll sort that. No problem. Okay, sorry about the wee delay, guys. I'm just going to apologies for the delay, everybody. I'm just trying to get this to behave itself. Thank you for your patience.
That's all right. And make sure we do it right. Eh?
There we go. That's the one I wanted. Okay, hopefully you can all see that.
Yep, can see it. Go and try the sound.
Perfect. Thank you.
How did they get us to jump on board this program so enthusiastically? Well, two of their most effective strategies are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they actually make stuff to be useless as quickly as possible, so we'll chuck it and buy a new one. It's obvious with things like plastic bags and coffee cups, but now it's even big stuff. Mops, DVDs, cameras, barbecues even, everything. Even computers. Have you noticed that when you buy a computer now, the technology is changing so fast that in just a couple of years, it's actually an impediment to communication? I was curious about this, so I opened up a big desktop computer to see what was inside. And I found out that the piece that changes each year is just a tiny little piece in the corner. But you can't just change that one piece because each new version is a different shape. So you gotta chuck the whole thing and buy a new one. So I was reading industrial design journals from the 1950s when planned obsolescence was really catching on. These designers are so open about it. They actually discuss how fast can they make stuff break that still leaves the consumer having enough faith in the product to go out and buy another one. It was so intentional. But stuff cannot break fast enough to keep this arrow afloat. So there's also perceived obsolescence. Now, perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful. How do they do that? Well, they change the way the stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple of years ago, everyone can tell that you haven't contributed to this arrow recently. And since the way we demonstrate our value is contributing to this arrow, it can be embarrassing. Like, I've had the same fat white computer monitor on my desk for 5 years. My coworker just got a new computer. She has a flat, shiny, sleek monitor. It matches her computer, it matches her phone, even her pen stand. She looks like she's driving in Spaceship Central, and I look like I've got a washing machine on my desk. Fashion is another prime example of this. Have you ever wondered why women's shoe heels go from fat one year to skinny the next to fat to skinny? It's not because there's some debate about which heel structure is the most healthy for women's feet. It's because wearing fat heels in a skinny heel year shows everybody that you haven't contributed to that arrow as recently, so you're not as valuable as that person in skinny heels next to you, or more likely in some ad. It's to keep us buying new shoes. Advertisements and media in general plays a big role in this. Each of us in the US is targeted with over 3,000 advertisements a day. We see more advertisements in 1 year than people 50 years ago saw in a lifetime. And if you think about it, what's the point of an ad except to make us unhappy with what we have? So 3,000 times a day, we're told our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our clothes are wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong, we are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media also helps by hiding all of this and all of this. So the only part of the materials economy we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happens outside of our field of vision. So in the US, we have more stuff than ever before, but polls show that our national happiness is actually declining. Our national happiness peaked in the 1950s, the same time that this consumption mania exploded. Interesting coincidence. I think I know why. We have more stuff, but we have less time for the things that really make us happy. Friends, family, leisure time. We're working harder than ever. Some analysts say we have less leisure time than any time since feudal society. And do you know what the two main activities are that we do with the scant leisure time we have? Watch TV and shop. In the US, we spend 3 to 4 times as many hours shopping as our counterparts in Europe do. So we're in this ridiculous situation where we go to work, maybe 2 jobs even, and we come home and we're exhausted. So we plop down on our new couch and watch TV, and the commercials tell us you suck. So you got to go to the mall to buy something to feel better, and then you got to go to work more to pay for the stuff you just bought. So you come home and you're more tired, so you sit down and you watch more TV, and it tells you to go to the mall again. And we're on this crazy work, watch, spend treadmill, and we could just stop. So in the end,
okay. So I do urge you, if you haven't seen the story of stuff before, I would urge you to go and have a look at the whole video. It's about 22 minutes long. It's really worth having a look at how that kind of, the way things were set up in this linear system works, and that we think about all these ways that we're being kind of encouraged to consume more. So can you think of any examples of where you are being encouraged to consume more? Any examples from things that you've seen or done where you think I'm being encouraged to buy more stuff when I don't really need it? Thank you, Kat. So Kat says clothes. Yeah, absolutely. So just as in the video, we were talking about heels and heel size. Fashion brands tend to promote you've got to buy the latest fashion, you've got to buy the latest style, and getting rid of old clothes that are still perfectly functional, perfectly usable, but you chuck them out and you buy new ones because you've got to be seen to be part of that consumerism. You've got to be shown to be showing your value by buying stuff and keeping up with all the latest trends. Junk food, absolutely. So yeah, often food that we don't really isn't actually particularly good for us. We're encouraged to eat more of it and to buy more and bigger, and often it's the kind of deals, isn't it? So you can get a kind of super size or a bigger size for what is actually marginally less than the buying the smaller amount. So maybe it costs £1 to buy a drink, but it's only £1.20 to get one that's almost double the size. So you think, oh, I'm getting a good deal there, but you're just being encouraged to spend money that you didn't actually need to spend because the smaller one would probably be perfectly fine. So often we find these deals, buy one, get one free. It's not actually saving us a lot of money, but what it is encouraging us to do is consume more. Cat as well is another one. Brilliant. Yeah, so kitchen gadgets as well. So you've got to have the latest fad to stay healthy. So health food eating and healthy lifestyles will become a massive consumer market. So we're now being encouraged to buy more things, gym equipment and kitchen gadgets and different types of food in order to be kind of healthy and keep up with that way of doing things. And one you probably might have noticed, because I'm guessing probably quite a lot of you listening today have a smartphone or some kind of mobile phone. And that's another really good example. So just like in the video when they were talking about computers and how often it's just a small thing that goes wrong and yet we still have to replace the entire thing, mobile phones become obsolete very quickly. And phone companies are really encouraging you to buy a new handset. You've got to keep buying and buying. So they want you to buy a new handset as soon as possible since you bought the last one. And actually, some companies have been found to actually slow handsets down and mess with battery life on old models to encourage you to think that your phone is less useful and so you need to go and buy a new one. And Corporation Apple were fined $500 million a couple of years back for doing just that. So they were caught out using their software to slow down old phones to the point at which people were finding them less useful and going and buying new ones. And that part of the reason for giving that example is that's a really, really good example of people working together to make change to how this whole thing works. So we can change the way this works and change from a linear system and from consumerism being what we value by working together. So with Apple, lots and lots of different people from different backgrounds worked together, came together for this lawsuit, and Apple were fined $500 million, which is significant and will certainly put them off doing things like that in the future. So why do we so often feel like it's all on us? Why do we feel like, it's my fault, I have to change what I do, I have to change my individual footprint, it's all about me, on me to make the changes? Part of that reason, the reason for that is that people who want you to keep consuming want you to focus on individual action. Because if you focus on individual action, like I say, that makes it kind of your fault. And so you end up in the kind of cycle of it's my fault, so you only do things that for you. And to give you an example of why this might be is, so do you know who promoted the concept of a carbon footprint? So it seems like a really good eco-friendly thing, right? It was actually BP, so British Petroleum. So they promoted the concept of a carbon footprint because they wanted to encourage people to focus on individual action and to blame each other for the problems with releasing too much carbon. So not blaming the corporation that's digging up all of the fossil fuels and burning them. No, we've got to blame each other and focus on individual action. Now, that's not to say carbon footprints aren't important. And it's definitely important to change individual things and change things about our lifestyles in the fight against climate change. But what's even more important is that we try and find ways that we can work together and collectively take action. But it might seem like there's just too many problems and they're too big to solve. It's all too much, right? We can't solve this. We might as well give up. So I would say very much wrong. So just to give you a few examples of where collective action has happened. When I was at school, when I was at high school, I was taught about quite a few different problems in the world and they all seem pretty terrifying. So there was acid rain, where pollutants were mixing with water in the air and causing damage to trees and waterways. There was a huge hole in the ozone layer across the South Pole. Whale populations had been reduced to extremely low numbers by commercial whaling. And they were still blowing up atomic bombs in Asian seas in order to test whether they worked or not. And all of these things are now either a thing of the past or becoming a thing of the past. So acid rain is pretty much completely gone because we brought in pollution controls. It's still a problem in some countries like China, but it's pretty much solved everywhere else. And the areas that were damaged are recovering. In 1987, the Montreal Protocol was agreed, which stopped CFCs being released. And the ozone layer is now healing and will be due to be healed by 2060. So within my lifetime, this terrifying problem will hopefully be solved. Populations of humpback whales have gone from a low of about 10,000 up to 80,000 and are recovering really well. And in 1996, nuclear weapons testing was banned worldwide. So we can dare to dream. We can believe that the world can get better if we work together. So what I'd quite like to leave you on today is just a couple of messages. So few of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. So don't worry about trying to fix everything, but think about what can you do? What can you contribute? And think about those individual actions because they really are worthwhile. But also think about, are there any campaigns you can join, advocacy groups? Can you talk to friends or family about things that you want to change? Can you influence policy and practices in your school? Can you write letters? And that's something we really would encourage you to do. We challenge you to go and write letters or emails to people who have the power to make change. Write them to companies, write them to your local MP and councillor, because particularly for your MP and councillor, they have to respond. So write letters and emails, ask questions, never stop asking questions and critically challenging what you see, and just do something. Because if all of us do something, particularly if we start working together more and stop blaming each other for getting it wrong, we're going to make a much bigger difference. So hopefully climate justice, you feel a bit differently about climate justice. So you have a think about if anything I've said has changed how you think about climate justice, about more equality, and about trying to work together to make things a bit better. And I'm just going to finally leave you with one last thought. So this is an image called Earthrise, which is one of the first images of the Earth that were taken by astronauts in the Apollo program. It's one of my favorite pictures. And I want you to think about this little Earth floating in space, and stop thinking about yourself as consumers. Think of yourself as citizens. You are citizens of the world, and you're not passengers on this spaceship Earth, you're crewmates. And if we think about things like that, we can stop valuing ourselves in the stuff that we buy and think about helping each other a bit more. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I hope that presentation has been helpful to you. Apologies for the slight technical issues in the middle. And I hope you're able to go out and carry out some of those climate action challenges that we've set for you, and go and do your bit. Thank you very much, everybody.